So, hello everyone. Thank you for being here for the trade and integration session. So we have 3 papers. I'm just replacing Bernard Hoekman, so I hope I'll be able to fill his shoes. We start and then I will discuss the papers. So we'll proceed as follows. Each paper will have between 15 and 17 minutes maximum. Then I give my comments from 3 to 5 minutes. And then Bernard, and if we have any questions from the floor, for 5 minutes, and then we proceed to the second paper. So this will allow us really to focus on each paper before forgetting what has been said in the beginning of the session. Okay? So Fatima, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So welcome everyone. As I said, I'm Fatima Khatabi. And today I'm going to present this working paper, which is entitled Trade and Connectiveness between Neighbours across the Strait. It's a very preliminary work. It's a working paper, so any comment, suggestion, or question is more than welcomed. It's along with Inmaculada Martinez-Zarzoso. And, well, okay, so what can we find in this paper? This paper analyzes the impact of migration flows on trade between Spain and Morocco during the closure of the border in 2020 because of the COVID-19 restrictions. So to the best of our knowledge, this is the first paper in which we are using subnational trade data, that it's NUTS3 in terms of Eurostat. And we are trying to investigate this effect of migration on trade between the Spanish, one of the Spanish and Moroccan provinces, and here in Morocco, prefectures too, covering this period from 2010 to 2021. So the motivation to do so is that the core models international trade and economic geography predicts that 2 economies which are located nearby will generate economic interaction in terms of trade, but also in terms of migration and foreign direct investment. So the relationship between Spain and Morocco has been characterized by different and cyclical disputes, but in the recent years, both countries have a great relationship, and they signed in 1991 the Treaty of Friendship and Good Neighborliness, which is great being neighbors. So the economic interaction that I mentioned before are really great, especially in the last decades. And as we can see, the data speaks by the economic data speaks by themselves, and Morocco is the top destination for Spanish exports, and 45% of the total exports going to Africa comes to here, to Morocco, which is a huge percentage. Then Morocco is the major importer in the Middle East and North Africa region, and has consolidated as the 9th largest recipient of Spanish exports. We can see that Spain is also Morocco's second largest supplier after France, and there is a high investment between both countries. There are around 20,000 Spanish firms operating here in Morocco. And of course, Spain attracts significant migration from Morocco. In Spain, there are around 775,000 Moroccan immigrants living there, being the first nationality with more residents living there in Spain. And of course, most governments design and implement different policies to open their borders to trade, but they are not so willing to do the same with migration. And as we saw yesterday in one of the sessions, we saw that, of course, this migration can be mutually beneficial for both the home as well as the host country in terms of facilitating trade, remittances, and so on. So going to the related literature, the literature that link these two trade and migration are focusing upon a single country and her trading partners. There are many examples for Canada, the United States, and so on. In the case of Spain, there is only one, which is Blanes San Cristobal in 2003. There are other literature. I mean, I specified here 3 papers examining these direct links among a group of countries. For example, there are many examining the cross-section for 75 countries. Then Fiebelmeyer and Tubal for 2008 implement a cross-section for the OECD countries, and so on. Within a country, we can find, for example, an example for France, and which is Combes et al. And then the provinces strengthen with overseas other country partners. For Canada, many examples for the United States, and for Spain, we have Peri and Francisco Requena. The thing is that all this related literature specifies the importance. I mean, yesterday we talked about this in the parallel session about the lack of trade data in the Middle East and North Africa region, especially at the subnational level. So, to the best of our knowledge, the information available, official information available, is it at country to country level. The trade, in the case of trade, I mean, trade, exports and imports from Spain to Morocco as a whole. From the Spanish view, we can have information regarding some regions to Morocco as a whole. But there is a lack of information regarding some sectors. I mean, there are there are this lack of data that we talked before. So last year, no, 2 years ago, I have developed my own data set at province to province level, that it's NUTS3 for in terms of Eurostat, with trade flows between Spanish and Moroccan provinces, covering the period from 2010 to 2021, split into 15 sectors and 3 different transport modes: road, ship, and aircraft. Being the ship mode, the most important one, because of course, the coastline and the port connectiveness between both countries. So the data in this case, as I said, regarding trade, it's my own data set, which includes exports as well as imports, 3 transport modes, province to province level, covering the period that I have talked before, 15 sectors and monetary units and volumes, that it's euros and tons. And from the migration flows, we have the Spanish Statistical Office, which gives us information regarding immigration flows from Morocco, covering the period that I have mentioned, from 2010 to 2021. So there is many changes because I sent this like last year, so there have been many changes regarding this, but and I don't know if they put the updated version. It's okay. So at first we have the first framework, which is a gravity model of trade. And the specification here is for the PPML estimation. We have exports and I don't know. Okay, so we have exports, then we have the migration flows from Morocco, and the variables of the gravity model, the GDP of origin, Spanish provinces and destination, as well as the year, as well as the T, which is the year, the distance between both of them, and then the contiguity variable as a dummy variable, and different fixed effects. So here we have different columns. The first one is the traditional gravity model. Then in the second one, we have the origin and destination fixed effects. In the third one, we have the pair fixed effects. And finally, we have in the fourth one, the multilateral resistant terms. So in the first column, all the variables, the gravity variables are as expected. The GDP of origin destination, positive and significant, and around 1. The distance negative and significant 2, and the contiguity very high and a significant coefficient. So going to the migration variable, we can see that in the first column, which is the traditional gravity model, it's positive and significant, but when we add in this origin and destination, as well as fixed effects and the multilateral resistance terms, the coefficient decreases a little bit, but stays positive and significant. So as one of the main objectives is to see how it affected this closure of the border in 2020. We have this difference estimation in which we are going to see the impact of migration flows only on the export side. In this case, we are going to try to see what is happening before and after the closure of this border, being a control group, less than 10% of the migration flows, less than 10% of the migration flows out of the total of the distribution, and then the treatment group, it is more than this 10%. And this is, to see how this treatment group is in comparison with the control group, and we can see that the variable is also positive, significant, and significant. So going to the results and conclusions, this paper uses a difference in difference strategy and generalized gravity model to investigate the effect of these migration flows. We find evidence that there are positive trade effects between both countries, and specifically Spanish and Moroccan provinces. When using this generalized gravity model to control for multilateral resistant terms, we can see, and this time invariant factors, we can see that the trade creation effect has been slightly lower. Then the positive coefficients indicate that these Spanish provinces with more intense exports to Morocco are also the ones with more intense immigration. And there are many, many policy implications, but like summarizing it, the results obtained here are crucial to understand the current and future economic relation between both countries, as well as I put here, the macro regions that the Gibraltar Strait bridge, that is the Europe and Africa, especially the North Africa. Of course, this is a first preliminary result. I'm going to focus in the future to see the parallel trend as well as the heterogeneity. And the evaluation of this effectiveness of specific economic migration policies could indicate whether those contribute to compensate all the differences between both countries in this channel, which is only 13 kilometers. And that's all. Thank you so much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, I will give my discussion, and then we get the question, so you can sit here, please.
Here?
Yes. Okay, so now I will present my comments on the version I received, which is significantly different from what has been presented today, but I will do my best. Okay, so thank you, Fatima, for presenting this paper. Some general comments. I think that the main contribution of the paper that it tries to build a bilateral data set at the province level, which is, I mean, an innovation compared to the data that we have in the MENA region between Spain and Morocco between 2010-2018 for 15 sectors and 3 transport modes. They use a gravity model to estimate the classical determinants of trade using a new 2-stage procedure, and in the version I received, one of the innovation that was supposed to be done in the paper is to examine the social connectedness effect of this on trade. And the social connectedness was in the paper. They mentioned that it will be measured by Facebook connections and migration flows. So the major, I think the paper is, the version that I received was an incomplete draft because we didn't have the results in the version, not a single table of the regressions. So that's why I wasn't able to give comments on the regressions themselves. But I think that the topic itself is ambitious in the sense that it's very nice to have data at the province level because we don't have this. We don't have any bilateral data at the product level in the MENA region. So I think this would really be the main focus of the paper, given that it's a new data set. Then I think that the paper itself should be a methodological paper rather than examining a minor research question in this case. Because so far we have 3 different research questions in the paper. The first one, constructing a granular data, which is very good and which is per se a sufficient research question. Second, examining how more recent channels can enhance trade, like migration or Facebook. But I think those are really 2 different papers. And even the one of that you presented today on the effect of COVID closure, it's another 3rd paper. So better to have a paper on the methodology of constructing the data and examining this in a classical gravity setup or a structural gravity setup, and examine how the data can be used in different gravity models, and then have a paper really on social connectedness and another one on perhaps COVID closure. But really, so far they are really different research questions. One of the things that you, or the advantages of the data set is that you have also the transport mode, which is also an innovation. But I think one of the assumptions that we had in the, when you were constructing the data, especially on the road mode, where you mentioned that the flows are assigned to the province for which the difference between the actual and the optimal travel distance is minimum. And I was wondering if this is a realistic assumption in the sense that in some cases you might use a suboptimal transport route if you have some insecurity in a province, or that you want to avoid some provinces where insecurity is high. And we observe this, for instance, at the international level, when all the trade flows, instead of going through Suez Canal, they had to go, through South Africa in order to, because even if it was not optimal, but it was more secured. So I was wondering to what extent this assumption behind assigning the minimum travel distance is really realistic compared to the observed trade flows that we have. And then perhaps in all cases I will send you this because we don't have so much time, but there are several equations that need to be further elaborated and motivated in the paper. And I'm talking especially about the cascading system that you had, where you were explaining each level in order to construct this data set. I think this part is not very clear, and it's central in the paper, because based on that, you're constructing the data, and after this, you're using the data that you get in the gravity model itself. So this perhaps has to be better explained. And another issue, and this is fundamental in a gravity setup, how missing trade flows have been treated compared to zero trade flows, because they are completely different. I mean, I cannot assume that a missing value between 2 provinces is zero unless it's an observed zero that they do not trade. So this also needs a detailed discussion in the paper. And then another methodological thing that wasn't very clear in the paper, how the correspondence between the different levels of nomenclature that you have between different transport modes have been done, because this corresponding, the table of correspondence between the different levels of sectors that you have for shipping, for road and for air was not very clear. And I think the correspondence table was not included in the paper. So this also deserves an important discussion, because again, it will affect the final data set that you're using in the gravity model. Given that one of the most important value added of the paper is again this granular data, so including some major trends and main descriptive statistics on the mode of transport between different provinces, what types of products are traded. This also will enrich the paper in the sense that, again, I'm highlighting the fact that the main contribution of the paper is really the granular data. I think going through the details of the gravity model is not really needed because it's very well established now in the literature, so you can just cite the main references, Anderson, Van Ween, Koop, Yotov 2016, etc. But really, you don't need to go to all the details of the gravity model. I was wondering also whether you can, given that you might want to run the gravity model under different specifications, and again, we're going to forget about the part on social connectedness. I was wondering whether in the first stage of your estimation, you can also add some mode product or mode fixed effects, transport mode, I mean, because as far as I remember, it was not included, and it's important because your data is also changing by mode of transport. And then in the second stage, in one of the regressions, not the results, but in the methodology itself, you're mentioning that you're going to use export year and import year fixed effects to measure the multilateral resistance, right? But it's also important to run the regressions with export product year and import product year fixed effects because you have also the product dimension, and this will better reflect the structure of your data set. Then one thing that was not clear, and I don't know if it's a mistake or it's on purpose, that in the methodology, the bilateral variable on Facebook and the bilateral variable on migration were not bilateral. And in theory, they have to be bilateral. And, sorry, they were bilateral, but not time invariant. So if they are time invariant, we have to understand why. Because in general, migration flows can change from a year to the other, and Facebook connections can also change from a year to the other. And if they are not time variant, this means that they will be captured by the bilateral fixed effects, so we'll not be able to measure them. Then I have some minor comments, but I think to wrap up, instead of including Facebook and migration variables, it's better to motivate the paper from a data and methodological perspective, and comparing how to use the data in different gravity techniques with different fixed effects, different specifications, and see what you get. And then it will also be very interesting, given that the innovation of your paper is a granular data, is to compare also the results that you get from a classical macro data relative to the granular data that you have. Then that's it. I will stop here, and thank you so much for a very ambitious project. Thank you. Okay, so now we can collect some questions, and then we'll give the floor to Fatima to respond. Any questions or comments? Bernard?
Yeah, thanks. So I think this is very interesting, but I think it was also a bit confusing, at least to me. So I guess three questions. So in terms of the way you presented it, this is all about looking at the effects. The COVID shock is being used as an identification mechanism. And it wasn't really clear to me, if you're thinking about immigration, are we, presumably a lot of those people are already there, right? So the movement that is then stopped at the border, are these mostly short-term movements? I mean, people going back and forth, visiting family, doing business? I assume that's what you're looking for. But I think it would be good to have some more clarity on what exactly is the channel, right? So what's the mechanism through which the shock is going to work? On the sub-national, the provincial data, I think that would be great. And I guess the question here is, do you have the province-to-province flows, both within Morocco and within Spain? Because again, if we're thinking about COVID and the COVID shock, that shock is also going to play out in terms of intranational exchanges, right, between the provinces. because it's not just about closing down the border temporarily for people movement and tourism, but it's also going to be lockdown, right? So insofar as we have lockdown policies applied in Spain, I don't know what happened in Morocco, that's also going to have an effect on trade. So disentangling those two mechanisms, I think, is important. And thirdly, when you presented the treated group versus the control group, it wasn't very clear to me, how you do that. But I think the key thing here is this, the first 2 points that I made. Thanks.
Other comments or questions from the floor, and then we give Fatima some few minutes to respond. Any comments? Okay, so
just one addition. So I think also on the contiguity, you had this control variable on contiguity, and that also kind of struck me as a bit strange, because presumably any two provinces who are going to be contiguous are mostly going to be intranational, right? So, and again, I think clarifying that would be important, because then we're not talking about international borders anymore. Thanks.
Thank you, Bernard. Fatima?
Okay, so I hope that I can answer every question. Yeah, one of the things that this is the thing, like I started doing everything in one paper, and then I realized what you told me. So the thing is that now I separated everything, and now the first paper, which is the project of my PhD, it's to explain this methodology, and everything regarding the data set, which is now under review, and then separating it from migration and Facebook, the social connectedness, which is, I tried to use this Facebook variable. And one of the things that you mentioned, and this is why it's not here, is because the migration, it's varying a long time, like from the period that I had. But Facebook, it's only for its time invariant. So we have, from regions to regions between Spain and Morocco, but we do not have the time which covers the period that I have selected. This is why the Facebook was out at first, and then I keep the migration. But yeah, it's true, there are like 3 different papers. This is why, I did it separately, and today it was like, I'm going to explain I wanted to explain the data set, but it's now under review, and I said, okay, maybe I'm going to the second part using these migration flows. So, okay. Yeah, and of course, in this first paper, I used this, what you mentioned, like origin year product fixed effects, as well as destination year product fixed effects, because I'm including these 15 sectors as well as all the years. And I think that I answered everything regarding what you said. And going into the what Bernard asked, yeah, the control and the treatment groups. The thing is that at first, I'm like using these averages, let's say, in which we say that the control group, it's that less than 10% in average of the Moroccan immigrants out of the total distribution, and then we have as a treatment group like more than 10% of this, of this average of Moroccan immigrants out of these total groups. Of course, we cannot have as a control group 0 immigrants, because always there are going to be a percentage in this case. And I don't know if it's okay.
Okay, thank you, Fatima. Any further comments? Bernard, any further comments from your side?
No, I think we should keep on going in the interest of the 2 other speakers. So.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Now we move to the second paper that will be presented by Kowsar online. So Kowsar, please unmute yourself, and you have 15 to 17 minutes to present the paper. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kowsar Yousefi from the Sharif University and the Institute for Management and Planning Studies. And I'm going to present research on the trade and trade policies, and it's a joint research with Mr. Samad Alaamati. And the title of this research is Traders' War Against Trade Walls with Evidence from Import Prohibition in Iran. The import prohibition is one of the trade policies, one of the trade interventions. That's a longest-standing one, and we have seen it in the history of trade, and it's justified in at least 3 ways. The first justification is regarding the development strategies of different countries. For example, if a developing country wants to implement a development plan, it sometimes contains some trade policies or some trade prohibitions in order to substitute import with domestic production. And another justification is to improve balance of payment, especially when countries receive shocks towards their trade balances and they want to improve it, so they ban some part of the imports in order to improve the balance of payment. And the third justification is regarding retaliation against the misconduct of trading partners. When they want to retaliate, they sometimes, some countries sometimes ban importation, some specific importation of specific exporting countries. But the thing is that during the last decades, when globalization is taking center, we don't see that much of trade prohibition, except for the recent years when COVID-19 causes some export ban on vaccines, or when the trade wars between China and US started before the COVID-19, or even after the Russian invasion of Ukraine that caused some export ban on the food chain, and it intervened the food chain all over the world. And in Iran, we always have had some trade bans, especially on products like alcohol, pork, and those things that are considered as haram culturally. But in recent years, specifically after 2018, when the former President Trump unilaterally withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Actions and exacerbated sanctions over Iran, the country, Iran, faced with a very considerable currency crisis, and Iranian rial started to depreciate, and the Iranian administration wanted to unfreeze some of the money that were locked in South Korea due to sanctions. And as a result of those negotiations over unfreezing the money, the South Korean government offered to export Korean products to Iran, especially home appliances, some garments, and so on. And the news spread all over the producers in Iran, and they were so afraid that if like $7 billion of export from Korea is coming to Iran, then the production of those products will be totally destroyed inside the country. And as a result, they started lobbying to ban importation of home appliances, garments, vehicles, and so on. And at the end of the day, the producers won the game, and the government banned more than 1,000 HS8 codes. since 2018. That's last till now. And what we see here as economists, we understand that that policy aimed to protect domestic production and to improve trade balances of Iran. But the question is that, are there mechanisms that are neutralizing that policy? For example, is this policy activating some smuggled import, some illegal import that's actually neutralizing that policy and decreases its effect on and actually doesn't allow that policy to reach its goal? Or other mechanism, are importers misclassifying between similar products, or are consumers actually substituting between similar products? Are these channels actually neutralizing the policy and make it not reaching its goal? So that's our concern. And among these channels here in this study, we are focusing on the illegal importation, and we are using a difference in difference methodology because we do have a well-defined treatment group of products and a very well-defined control products. And we also use the event studies approach to test for the parallel trend between the treatment and control groups. And we do use UN Comtrade and Iranian customs. And before I go to the data and model, let me fast review the literature. The trade interventions comes in different justification. First, improving balance of payment. That's justified under one of the articles of the GATT. And it's also justified as protection over infant industry, as Balastan 1965 especially is mentioning. But the infant industry is criticized by Kruger 1980 because it's activating lots of rent seeking. And Kruger says if a country enforces protection over infant industry, it ends up with lots of rent seekers rather than producers. And the literature, the literature summarizes these criticism that such policy should be carefully evaluated, carefully, periodically, and constantly be evaluated to see what are the cons and pros of such policies. And another mechanism, another justification is retaliation. We only see two cases of retaliation. And we also see development plans. For example, in Iran, during 70s, we had a very successful development plan that was based on import substitution, banning on the imports. But that's not the case for all the countries. For example, we see failure in Brazil's computer development. And we see lots of cases, many of them are failures rather than success. Okay, here, what we see here, what we do have here, we do have data from UN Comtrade that consists of export of other countries to Iran. And on the Iranian side, we do have the custom reported imports from different countries. And we use the difference between officially reported export minus officially reported import as a proxy for illegal importation. And we do understand that this proxy contains some measurement errors, as FINSTRA 2000 says, because different countries use different systems to measure the trade. Or also, such data doesn't contain unofficial products that are exported and at the same time unofficially imported. So such data contains some errors, but when we're talking about illegal activities, By nature, it's very hard to measure it. And since Fisman and Way 2006, the difference between reported export of exporting countries and the reported imports of the importing countries is considered as a good or reasonable proxy for the illegal imports. Not a perfect one, but a reasonable one. That can be quantified at each product level. And that's a pros for this proxy because it is very disaggregated, and we are using this disaggregation for our identification here. And as you can see here, the share of prohibited items since the 2018 policy in Iran is distributed over different products like cereal, animal nutrition categories, and so on, and also over different exporting countries. United Arab Emirates is one of our main trading partners, and as you can see here, the share of exports from there is very large. Also, you can see the South Korea. And if we look more carefully to the products that are prohibited and check which portion of them are consumer products, which portion are intermediates, raw, and capital, we observe that most of the products that are prohibited are among consumer products, more than 50%. And that was the aim of the policy. The policy was aimed to protect domestic production. And so there were no reason to ban intermediary products. So they mostly had banned consumer or final products. Okay, here is our final and somehow cleaned data set where we do have reported export by exporters. We do have reported import by Iran, and we have created the trade gap as a difference between these two measures. And we do have dummies for prohibition. We do have statutory tariffs at each product
Fatma,
level.
you have 5 minutes.
Okay, and we do have value-added tax rate at each product level. First, let's see what's the schematic of the illegal imports proxy. On the left-hand side, you can see the non-prohibited goods in 2017, before the prohibition policy, and 2020 after that. You can see the distributions are both centered centered at zero. But when we look at consumption prohibited goods, those are the treatment group. You can see that the distribution of illegal imports is shifting towards right, meaning that after the prohibition policy is enforced, on average, we see more illegal importation. But this is just the schematic, and we use this specification. It's based on DID, difference in difference, with fixed effect at product level, fixed effect at year, prohibition dummies multiplied by time for prohibition, VAT rate, and statutory tariff. And we are going to estimate this specification, as you can see here in this table. In the first column, let's focus on the first column. The dummy for prohibition multiplied by years of prohibition. You can see the coefficient is very positive and significant. And because we have enforced some sinus hyperbolic transformation, this is not the marginal effect. The marginal effect is calculated below the table that says with this prohibition policy, illegal importation among the treated products is increased by 20%. And that's a really huge number when we compare it to the elasticity of illegal imports with regards to tariff rise in Fisman and Way. that they are studying China and Hong Kong, they report an elasticity of 2%. When Mishra et al. Report an elasticity for the Indian illegal imports, they report about 2%. But here, we don't have a usual tariff rise. We do have a trade ban. That means tariffs are somehow infinite. So you can see that illegal importation has increased by 20%. That's a very large number, very considerable. Here are some robustness checks, controlling for a specific product trend and so on. I'm not gonna spend time on that. And here is an event study schematic for the checking for the parallel trends. As you can see, the two groups of treatment and control are behaving similar to each other before the prohibition policy is enforced. But after that, the behaviors are different from each other. And if I want to conclude, prohibition is an extreme policy in the history of trade. We hadn't seen that much of prohibition in recent decades, but in the last years, in the few last years, we have had some cases of prohibition. That's an alarm to globalization, an alarm to free trade. In Iran, we do have a situation that allows us to identify the impact of prohibition policy on the illegal importation and to check whether this mechanism neutralizes at least some part of that policy and ban it to reach its goal. And what we see is that this prohibition increases illegal imports by at least 20%, and that's the lower boundary. If we add other mechanisms in our future studies, we'll reach to higher elasticity. And thank you. I'm here to have your feedbacks and comments. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kowsar, very much for the presentation and for keeping the time. Now I'll present my comments. So, you can see the screen, right? Okay. So this paper is very interesting because the literature on Iran and domestic trade policies is not abundant. So I think this will be a very interesting contribution to the literature on the trade policy in Iran. And they try to find some causal relationship between the imposition of those prohibitions and the development of trade, including a difference in difference and an event study. They found, as Kowsar mentioned, the main finding is that we have an increase of 20% in illegal imports through many robustness tests, and the results hold for both goods and consumption goods. So clearly, next. So as I said, it's a very important contribution, but I think the one major concern would in the paper would be how illegal imports are defined. Because in the paper, and Kowsar mentioned it in the presentation, it's the difference between reported imports by Iran Customs Administration and the reported exports by the mirror data obtained from the World Integrated Trade Solution. But clearly, I think that despite the fact that several mechanisms might hold, but definitely we're going to have some measurement error in the variable itself, because we know that in mirror data in general, for instance, the BASI data set that is constructed through the mirror data in order to overcome all the problems that we have in ComTrade. So we cannot really claim that all the difference between exports and imports are illegal trade. And as you said also, misclassification, customs fraud, and in addition to all this, not only illegal trade, but also informal trade. And we know that there is a fundamental difference between informal and illegal trade, given the fact that informal trade might also be very dominant in this case. And I was wondering also to what extent the results of the 20% effect are valid, in the sense that already we have several countries that impose sanctions on Iran, which means in this case that several imports coming from other countries, from other origins, I mean, by definition, or perhaps those countries are not exporting to Iran, which means that in this case, even if Iran imposes a prohibition on these imports, in all cases, we're not importing these products in Iran because our partners are not exporting to us because of the trade sanctions. And I think this discussion of the trade sanctions in the paper is important in order to disentangle the effect of the sanctions on the one hand from the prohibition, which is a domestic policy, on the other hand. And then, and as you mentioned in the conclusion, informal trade and other measures are widely used to circumvent and neutralize this policy. So, to what extent, in this case, this policy can be disentangled really from the effect of the policy is really due to this policy, not to other factors. So I think in general, given all the drawbacks in first on how to define illegal imports, and second, that we have different channels through which we can explain those effects, the 20% effect has to be toned down a bit because it suffers from different validity measures. Next. And I think to better motivate the work, it's important to examine three things. And this has been also shown in this literature on mirror data. First, what is the share of matching flows when we compare exports and imports? I mean, when a partner country's export is reported for the declared import description. And this we call then the first group, matching flows. And the second group would be the orphan imports, which is in this case, the trade flows is declared by the importing country, but missing in the partner country. And this can support either tariff slippage or fraud or other potential explanations. And then we have also the lost exports, which means that if the trade flow is reported by the exporter as export by the partner country, but doesn't have a correspondence declaration and are not recorded by the importing country. And this has been shown in different papers in the literature. And I think this distinction in your data set when you compare data from Iran and data from other sources will better motivate or perhaps convince the reader of this mismatch between the data that you have in Iran and the international data sets. Some perhaps extensions to see what is the marginal effect of other policy variables that you have in the paper, because you introduce tariffs and taxes, and those two channels are not really explored in the paper. So perhaps it will be interesting to see to what extent the effect of prohibitions was perhaps exerting a more a stronger effect for products that have a higher tax or a lower tax, or products that have a higher or a lower tariff. And these two channels, these two policy channels, if I can call them this way, are not really explored. And then another extension, perhaps also, I was wondering to what extent we have some sectors that are characterized by state-owned firms. I'm not familiar with the Iranian economy, but perhaps if we have some state-owned firms, those politically connected firms or state-owned firms, and this has been shown for other MENA countries, like the paper by Layla on Tunisia, that in some cases, politically connected firms might be more protected, or might might impose further prohibitions on those sectors because they are simply connected. So this dimension also could be explored in order to show if we have any differences between sectors where we have state-owned firms relative to those we don't have state-owned firms. And then a third point also, I was wondering what if the product, as I mentioned in the beginning, are already subject to a sanction imposed by the exporter. And we know that if we look at the data set that was constructed by Feldmayer and Yotov on the bilateral sanctions, if we look at the trade sanction, we have a lot of countries that impose on Iran trade sanctions, and Iran imposes also on those countries trade sanctions. And that's why those products are not, I mean, we do not observe an effect of the prohibition policy, because those products are not exported in all cases because of these sanctions. And in addition, from the Iranian side, I think also perhaps that Iran has already imposed sanctions on these countries, and therefore the prohibition policy imposed by the Iranian economy in this case does not really reflect the effect of the prohibition per se, but also the effect of even the sanction imposed by Iran, not by its partners. Next. And then I think those are minor comments. Perhaps I can send you to them. I can send them to you on the literature review and better motivating the literature also through the sanction story. And that's it. I will stop here. And thank you, Kowsar. We'll just get some questions from Bernard and from the floor, and then you respond to all the questions together, okay? Bernard, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a really cool paper. So it's if you read sanctions Iran in the title of a paper, it's always going to be about export sanctions by other countries imposed on Iran, right? So this is a nice flipping of looking at Iranian trade policy. So I also had the same kind of reaction that Chahir just had in terms of you need to look at both the interaction between the import policy and the export policies of Iranian trading partners, right? And I think one way of dealing with many of the comments that Chahir just made is to look at specifically these products that are subject to the import prohibition, and then look at what does the market structure look for those products, right? So who is doing most of the action in terms of exporting to Iran? So if a lot of this is China, as I might expect, right? So if a lot of countries that don't impose export sanctions on Iran, then I guess you're in a much better position to say, listen, there's actually a lot of trade going on here. Yes, it's going to be partially affected by export controls and sanctions imposed on Iran, but this policy of prohibiting imports really is going to have bite, because there's a lot of stuff coming from countries that are not participating in that regime. So, and I think given that it's mostly consumer goods, I would expect that most of this stuff is going to come from other developing countries. It's going to come from China. So therefore, some of these issues that Chahir raised might not be that problematical, but at the same time, I think it also makes the story more interesting. A second minor comment I had in terms of the literature, there is a literature on safeguards, right? And the way you presented and motivated why this policy was implemented was really about the domestic industry saying, enough, we need to be protected, we need help. And that's very much a safeguards type story. Now, safeguards usually are not import prohibitions and they don't last forever, but nonetheless, I think there is a large literature on safeguards that you might want to refer to, starting with work that Bhagwati and Srinivasan did in the 1970s already, in terms of looking at the incentive effects of imposing suddenly import restrictions. Third comment, I think it would really benefit to have more of a discussion in the paper as to how does it actually work, right? So, okay, so you're estimating a significant amount of smuggling going on. So how is that possible, right? So where is that trade? What's the mechanisms for actually getting these goods that are being smuggled into the country? So again, that would kind of help enrich the storyline, because clearly if it's 20%, that's pretty big. So that presumes that either, there's things going on like relabeling, but the traditional kind of stories about relabeling, et cetera, don't work, because this is a complete import prohibition. Right, so then how does that stuff then get into the country? I think is an interesting question. Fourth, which has nothing to do with the paper as such, but I think given that you've done all of this work, it would be really interesting to look at what's the effect of this import prohibition, which has been lasting for a long time, on the performance of the domestic industry. Right, so insofar as you have firm level data for these industries over time, you can kind of look at, okay, what's the effect on the performance of these firms relative to control group where, you know, you don't have this import policy playing out. And I think, you know, that would be a really nice complementary paper to write. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Always very rich comments. Any other comments from the floor to Kowsar? Okay. Yes, just a second, Kowsar. One comment from Layla.
Thank you, Chahir. Thank you very much, Kowsar, for this very interesting paper. Just a clarification, I would like to understand if it seems that Kowsar is using a HS2 level, right? Or she's going to HS6? Because it's difficult really to, if you are speaking, at least my experience with informal trade, with I mean, with this misreporting or mirror trade, it's very difficult. You really need to go as detailed as possible, because there are some, you know, what you said, misreporting or using different other name, and it's really important to go into the most detailed trade. And second question, just for clarification, why also not checking the data, the international data on Iran? What's Iran? Because Kowsar is only using data reported by Iran, but the international data, what is happening as reported by Iran? Is there some differences? I'm just surprised by this number. And also to confirm what you said, in general, you have a limit to say this is really misreporting, and it goes even further than 20%. You need to have bigger than 20% to say this is, you know, we can really speak about misreport. And I totally agree with Bernard. It's important to know the market structure and what's going on inside the country also, in terms of either, you know, the structure, the concentration, maybe, and if there are other policies concerning this particular product, to see what is going on internally, why there is this prohibition exactly, and if there are other things too, maybe she needs to look at.
Other comments? Okay, over to you, Kowsar. You have 3 minutes to respond to all the questions.
Thanks, Chahir. And thanks, Bernard, and thanks, Layla, for your very good comments. I certainly we certainly will consider them in the future versions of the paper. But just to respond to some of them, the Iranian reported custom data is what they actually, the UN Comtrade is based on the reports of each country. So overall, there is no difference if we use UN Comtrade and take Iran as the reporter, or we use the original data from the Iran. So both the data sets are having the same origin of the Iranian custom. And regarding the errors in the difference between reported export and the reported imports, yes, we understand that there are some measurement errors. We understand that some parts of informal trading is not covered in it. But a response would be that we are not using that measure to quantify the volume of informal trade. We are using that just to measure the correlation of the informal trade with the policy. And when this correlation is used, it's somehow and the correlation is significant. It's somehow showing that that measurement error maybe is distributed over all categories of products, and it's not concentrated over one specific category, and it doesn't bias the result. That's a response also that Fisman and Wei respond to what FinStra 2000 says about the measurement error that's inside this proxy for informality. And regarding the sanctions, Chahir, as a robustness check, we have excluded the years before 2012 because what we see, what's our understanding about Iran's economy after sanctions that started from 2011, actually January of 2012, the structure of the Iranian economy has changed. So as one of our robustness tests, we have excluded the pre-sanction years. And in 2018, we didn't have new sanctions. We only had US unilaterally withdrawing from the JCPOA. So there were no actually new sanctions, but only one country was excluding from the negotiation. And regarding the heterogeneity over taxes, over different products, or over different exporting countries, as Bernard mentioned, yes, that can be a very great extension of our work. Regarding the safeguards, yes, we should look at that literature. And regarding the discussion over how it works, actually, fortunately or unfortunately, we do have lots of channels for informal trade in Iran. And once we see that trade barriers, whatever, if it's the tariff, if it's VAT, if it's a trade ban, once they're enforced, we see that those channels are activated or pronounced. And those channels exist, and we do have them in everyday life, and those channels exist, but those channels are flexible. What we see in the data is the flexibility of those channels. They respond to trade policies, and you're right, I have to mention all these channels, all this market structure in the paper, and also its effect on the production in Iran. If I finally find a way to merge the HS codes with the IC codes, because the industry is based on the IC codes and the trade system is based on HS, and I am struggling with merging these two because the accuracy of merge will go down. If I find a solution for that, definitely a good extension of this work would be how much is the effect of this protectionism on the industry side of Iran. But overall, I'm thankful to all of you. And
Great.
yes,
Thank you, Kowsar, so much.
I
Thank you
appreciate
so much. Now we move to the third paper, in person, not online. So
from Sinop University. It is open? Yes, I think it's open. I am Fatma from Sinop University. In this paper, we focus on the drivers and collateral benefits of both regional and international financial integrations. According to theory, the movement of capital is beneficial because it provides efficient capital allocation, greater risk sharing, and promotes better growth opportunities. However, the empirical literature does not provide a convincing evidence on the beneficial effect of capital flows. For instance, some studies, I think I am here, but this is the older version. Anyway, I will continue my presentation. Actually, some studies find that there is a slight improvement in welfare with the increase in capital flows, while some other studies do not find a robust relationship between capital flows and economic growth. According to Kowsar, this is because of financial integration mainly affects economic growth by indirect channels. By the indirect channels, we mean financial development. I am so sorry. By the indirect channels, we mean capital account openness, increases financial development, enhances institutional environment, and better macroeconomic policies. In their paper, according to the literature, some studies find actually, the bulk of the literature do not find a robust relationship between capital flows and economic growth. According to Kowsar, this is because of the because of the case that financial integration affects economic growth, mainly indirect effects. These indirect effects meaning that capital account openness increases financial development, encourages governance, and provides better macroeconomic policies. In their paper, they call these indirect channels by collateral benefits. Even they say that these collateral benefits has a larger effect on macroeconomic variables than their direct effects. Consistent with the findings by Kowsar, the bulk of the literature find that capital account openness enhances the efficiency of the banking system, mitigates asymmetric information, enhances governance, and mitigates the cost of capital. But the recent literature says that following the recent global financial crisis, there is a substantial decline in capital flows. In addition, a recent World Economic Outlook published by IMF predicts a further slowdown in growth prospects for advanced, emerging market and developing economies. Given that capital flows are procyclical, this prediction may further imply a slowdown in capital flows. Unfortunately, this prevents the countries to obtain the collateral benefits of capital account openness. But the recent literature also says that regional financial integration can be a solution. You can think that regional financial integration is a subset of international financial integration. By definition, regional financial integration corresponds to the case that the bilateral financial flows within the economies in a specific region. This specific region in our paper is the MENA. But how can we measure regional financial integration? We are lucky that we can adopt the international financial integration definition by Lane and Milesi-Feretli. If we are focusing on bilateral financial flows in MENA economies, then we can construct regional financial integration by summing the gross stocks of assets and liabilities in GDP. After constructing the regional financial integration data, in this paper, we aim to contribute to the literature by looking at the drivers and collateral benefits of international and regional financial integrations. These are the figures that represent the evolution of international and regional financial integrations. As you can see, international financial integration decreases up to 2011, then it increases. Regional financial integration first decreases, then we observe an increasing trend up to the recent global financial crisis, but again, it mitigates. This figure briefly indicates that as compared to international financial integration, the size of regional financial integration is still at immature level. These are mainly network diagram, but this is the older version. I again plot the network diagram that shows the bilateral financial flows between the MENA economies, and I find that regional financial integration is mainly concentrated in resource-rich MENA economies. I am skipping this part. After this brief introduction, we can start with the investigation of drivers of international and regional financial integrations. To investigate these important issues, we consider that real income per capita, financial development, standardized governance variable, trade openness, and favorable global financial conditions proxied by delta VIX are important variables that affect international financial integration and regional financial integration. The figures that represent the evolution of international and regional financial integration suggest the persistence of financial integrations. To capture this effect, we also incorporate lagged international and regional financial integrations. Because of the endogeneity concerns, we estimate these equations by system GMM method. In our estimations, we maintain that global financial conditions proxied by delta VIX is strictly exogenous variable, while the rest of the variables are potentially endogenous. We estimate these equations for 11 MENA economies during the 1996 to 2020 period. These are the system GMM estimation results. In the first column, you can see the drivers of international financial integration, and we focus on the determinants of regional financial integration in the second column. When we look at the residual diagnostics, we observe that there is no second order autocorrelation and our instruments are valid. There is a positive and significant association between lag-dependent variables and our financial integration measures. This indicates the persistence of financial integrations actually. Real income per capita is positively associated with regional financial integration. Actually, this is consistent with our new network diagram, but you are unable to see that because regional financial integration is mainly concentrated among the resource-rich MENA economies. Financial development appears to enhance international financial integration because financial development mitigates the barriers on financial asset transactions. Trade openness enhances both international and regional financial integrations because trade openness mitigates, actually enhances information flows between the countries. Favorable global financial conditions represented by a decrease in VIX leads to higher international financial integration, but it does not have a significant effect on regional financial integration. After looking at the drivers of international financial integration and regional financial integration, we return to the paper of Kowsar. In their paper, Kowsar suggests that the most important beneficial effect of capital flows is collateral benefits. In our paper, the collateral benefits argument mainly consists of financial development and governance. In this equation, you can see the equation that investigates the relationship between international financial integration and financial development. To examine the association between these variables, we control the effects of real income per capita, consistent with the remarks by Kowsar. We also consistent with the remarks by Kowsar, suggesting that the collateral benefits are observable in economies with more financial integrated. To take into account this important issue, we also incorporate international financial integration score in our estimation. Again, we employ system GMM method. These are the system GMM results. Let me explain the first columns. In the first column, we focus on aggregate financial development index. Actually, in this paper, we consider the financial development index database published by Svirstenka and IMF. This data is disaggregated as financial institutions and financial markets. The data also allows us a further disaggregation with respect to depth, efficiency, and access. When we look at the table, international financial integration is positively associated with financial development, while international financial integration score is negatively associated with financial development, indicating that high levels of international financial integration lowers financial development. When we look at the disaggregated results, we observe that this relation is mainly driven by financial markets and especially financial market depth and financial market access. And then we focus on the relationship between financial development and regional financial integration. These are the results. Accordingly, regional financial integration is negatively associated with financial development, while regional financial integration score is positively associated with financial development. This is actually in contrast with our previous table, indicating that higher levels of regional financial integration promotes financial development, and this impact is mainly driven by financial markets, and financial markets efficiency, as you can see. Because of the time limitation, I will just summarize the association between international financial integration and governance. In this paper, we consider the aggregate governance indicator. The data are taken from worldwide governance indicators, and we disaggregate this as voice and accountability, rule of law, regulatory quality, control of corruption, government effectiveness, and political stability and no violence. Accordingly, high levels of international financial integration promotes governance, and this impact is mainly driven by control of corruption and government effectiveness. When we look at the results for the regional financial integration, we again obtain the same results. High levels of regional financial integration promotes governance, and this impact is driven by government effectiveness. Let me conclude. In this paper, we focus on the association between international financial integration, regional financial integration, and financial development and governance. We find that too much international financial integration deters financial development. This is because of the immaturity of stock and bond markets, inefficiently functioning state-owned enterprises, and limited access to financial markets. To diminish these adverse effects, many economies may regulate the financial sector, may provide some incentives for the participation of private sector, and may prioritize the development of stock and bond markets. Financial interdependence in MENA may generate common shared interests, provide stability, and diminish the likelihood of conflict. To encourage the regional financial integration further, many economies may introduce some structural reforms, including capital account liberalization policies, elimination of the impediments on regional financial integration, and improvement in institutional environment and financial development. In this vein, policymakers may design policies aiming to maximize the benefits of both international and regional financial integration. Thank you. You are welcome.
So as you have seen, this paper, Fatma presented the main findings on regional financial integration and international financial integration, as well as the effect of that on governance and on governance and financial development. So. So they used to do so a GMM system, and they examine different. And they use different variables for governance as well as for financial development, which is very rich. It's very interesting and policy relevant given the fact that financial integration is very low in the MENA region. So I think this is important, and you use also different data sets and the appropriate econometric technique in order to answer this, and the results are relatively robust. So I have one major comment that you have a lot of research questions in the paper, because you have, I mean, even in the introduction, you mentioned that you have three main contributions. First, that you construct a data set for the MENA region. Then you examine the determinants of international and regional financial integration, and then the effect of RFI on governance and financial development. And I think, again, those can be divided into two main papers. One on the determinants, and you really explore the determinants in a very robust way of RFI and IFI. And in another paper, the implications of that on governance, and in a third paper, the effect of that on financial development. Why? Because the theory behind and the literature, as well as the identification strategies that you might want to use, will be really different. So I don't think that given that each of them is a very rich question, I don't think that it would be good to keep them just in one paper, but better to focus this paper on the determinants, and then keep the other research question in another paper. So that's a very main or a very, I would say, general comment. Then it was not clear also in the title why you call the benefits collateral benefits. It was, the adjective itself is not clear, because for me it was like the effect or directly the benefits, if we assume that they are benefits, if we find a positive effect. But I don't think that the adjective collateral here in the title is clear or is revealing of what you're doing in the paper. So either to motivate it in the paper, or perhaps to remove this part from the paper and just explain the implications or the consequences and so on. Then, and this might be also a bit challenging, because I know that data, we don't have a lot of data on that, but whenever we talk about regional integration, we always talk about, or what we have in mind is a bilateral data set. Because it's very difficult to talk about regional financial integration without really examining what's going on at the bilateral level between MENA countries, for instance. So perhaps this can be also another venue for another paper to examine this research question, but from a bilateral perspective, not a unilateral data set where you have country year observation. Because so far, we cannot really observe what's going on between MENA countries themselves, and therefore we cannot really talk about regional integration. Next one, yes. Regarding the data, I didn't really get what is really different from what Lana and Ferretti they do in their paper, because you're basically using their data set, right? So, and at a certain point in the paper, it was mentioned that you construct an index for the MENA region. But it's not really a new index, because at the end of the day, you're using the raw data, but with just a different level of aggregation. So it's not, because in the introduction, you have the impression that you're constructing a new index based on this data set, which is not the case, because you're simply using their data, but at a different level of aggregation just for the MENA region, right? So I think this has to be a bit rephrased, given the fact that at the end of the day, it's mainly the data and of Lana and Milesi Ferretti. Then I think also the storyline of the section, descriptive statistics and stylized facts, can be improved, because we don't just want to see the evolution of each variable on its own, but perhaps some associations to see what are the main associations that you have in your data set at the level of the regional financial integration, for instance, with a trade policy variable, with the governance variable that you're including, instead of just showing the evolution of each variable on its own. Okay, next one. And this is also very important, because the choice of the explanatory variables that you're including in your main equation is not really motivated, neither theory-based, in the sense that we just want to see for each variable that you include why, from a theoretical perspective, it matters for either IFI or RFI. And then this is also being, working on trade. I think instead of including trade openness as exports plus imports over GDP, it's an outcome variable. It's better to use the tariff, the applied tariff of the average applied tariff, for instance, or the MFN tariff, a tariff variable. Why? For two reasons. First, because even if tariffs might be endogenous, but at least they are less endogenous than exports and imports over GDP. And on the other, it's a policy variable, and it will really help explain what is the role of trade policy when it comes to financial integration. Okay. In addition, you are using also an index of financial globalization, I think, if I'm not mistaken. The economic, social and political include several variables that are similar to financial globalization itself. So this was not clear, so if you want to say something?
Yes, I would like to something. I am calculating the international financial integration by summing the gross stocks of assets and liabilities. I am not using the COF de facto or de jure financial globalization index, which has economic, social, and political perspectives.
Yes, but I'm talking about the trade openness variable, because in one of the specifications you are using
I am using the COF de facto.
Yes,
Trade
exactly.
Globalization Index.
Yes. So that's what I mean for the trade openness. Instead of using the index of globalization, because the index of globalization includes a lot of variables, economic, social, and political, right? So the economic is not very revealing because it includes several things, among them exports and imports. The financial, and in the economic also we have the financial globalization, which is a bit similar to your left-hand side variable, which is the IFI and the RFI. So that's why at the end of the day, the globalization index includes a lot of endogenous variable related to your dependent variable. And that's why it's better in this case to use an explicit variable that measures trade openness, which is tariffs, the most straightforward variable in this case. And then the assumption behind the strict exogeneity of the VIX variable has to be justified because it was not clear why. In the paper, I can assume that you're talking about the global developments, but it has to be justified and perhaps empirically or tested to show this. Yes, sure. Yeah, sure. I agree on the assumption, but it has to be justified in the paper because it was not clear. Okay, and then I was given that the paper is mainly about financial integration. I was expecting other variables that really matter for financial integration, especially at the regional level. And those variables are first the existence of a sovereign wealth fund, because we know that the existence of regional sovereign wealth fund, now we have a lot of financial flows that are taking place through sovereign wealth funds. And this you can construct without any problem for the regional level, okay? Second variable is a fundamental distinction between oil exporters and oil importers, because we know that oil exporters, they invest potentially in oil importers, and we don't see this in this dimension, especially at the regional level, again, for the MENA region. Third, conflicts, because we know that MENA region, some MENA countries, they don't invest in other MENA countries because of conflicts, and this is not also controlled for. Fourth, the exchange rate regime, in the sense that to what extent the exchange rate regime of a country, we know, for instance, that in the case of Egypt, that has a managed exchange rate, it was not attractive for foreign investors. But once it started to change its exchange rate regime, some investors started to invest in the country. So controlling for the exchange rate regime is fundamental also. And finally, and this is also perhaps related to the recent developments that we're observing in the region, the political consideration, because we know now that a lot of countries, they invest in other countries just out of political considerations, not out of economic reasons. So now most of the Gulf countries, when they invest, again, I'm just taking the example of Egypt because I come from Egypt, they invest in Egypt for political reasons, not for economic reasons, despite the fact that the Egyptian economy is not so far attractive and nothing has changed so far, but for political reasons they are investing. And the literature, you can use different variables to measure the, how to say it, the political proximity with the main trade partner, for instance, like the similarity in UN votes or other variables. And then the results of IFI and RFI are different. The results of the IFI are more convincing than the latter, and it was not really clear why in the paper you're mentioning that low levels of regional financial integration reduce but high level increase the financial development. So this non-linear effect that you were talking about was not clear, especially that you didn't show in the paper what is the linear effect before talking about the non-linear effect. So first you have to introduce the variable itself, and then at a later stage the squared term. Given that in this paper, but I believe that it will be important to split the paper in two papers, but so far we have a bi-directional relationship between RFI and institutions, for instance. So we don't, at the end of the paper, we don't really understand whether the causality goes from governance to financial institutions, to financial integration, or from financial integration to institutions. So that's why it will be important to sort this out. And as I mentioned before introducing the square term, it's important to see first the linear effect, because perhaps the linear effect itself if we don't observe a linear effect, we can go to the nonlinear effect. But if we observe a linear effect first on its own, we can see later what happens to the linear effect once the nonlinear effect is introduced. Okay, and then the conclusion was a bit disconnected from the analysis, so I think it's important to revise the conclusion really in the light of what you're doing in the paper. That's it. Thank you so much. I will stop here. And Bernard.
Yeah, thanks. So I have I guess a comment and a suggestion. So one thing that struck me is that you're really looking at IFI, RFI separately, right, and estimating them separately. And that leads to the question, shouldn't these two things be related? You know, what's the interaction between them? So I think what I would like to see more of is more of a conceptual or theoretical discussion in terms of what the relationship might be between the two, and then how you address that. And that might have to do with, you know, susceptibility of crises or fragility, what have you. But again, I was just struck by that separation, and that I think needs justification. The suggestion is there's a recent paper that was published in the Journal of the European Economic Association by Alessina and Jonathan Austri and a bunch of people, where they use a new kind of global data set that I guess has been developed by people at the IMF, which looks at, and basically it's a time series panel data set on reforms in product markets, reforms in trade policy, reforms in labor markets, you know, whatever market you can think of. And I think that would give you a much more direct source of information in terms of policy, as opposed to looking at some of these outcome indicators that are being used in the analysis. So I would have a look at that paper and see. So I assume that data set is now public domain because it's been published. So I would suggest having a look at that, because that might give you additional variables which are more directly related to the types of drivers that you'd think should be important for explaining both IFI and or the RFI. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Bernard. Any other questions from the floor? Klaus?
Yes, very brief. I enjoyed very much your comments. I think they're right to the point. I have one question, because I did not read your paper, which I think is most interesting, which is simply if you have considered and analyzed the fact that regional financial integration is a second best, a far second best, of getting to the world frontier of optimal risk-return selection of a point on the world frontier for an individual person, for an individual country, and therefore you still have, it's not so optimal regional financial integration. So the question is, if on the empirical model you have considered flows or stocks of investment by each of the countries in other regions beyond the MENA region, because the more money, I guess, flows toward other regions, developed or developing, East Asian, Latin American, US, Europe, because people know about those markets, or they are attracted, or the policy to invest in those countries is not restrictive by domestic policy restrictions, then it might be, or might explain, that you have much less flows going to the regional integration.
Any other comments? Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, over
Can
to
I
you.
respond?
Yes, you have 2 minutes to respond to all the questions because we're running out of time.
Actually, the collateral meaning coming from the paper of Kowsar. In their paper, Kowsar suggests that these indirect channels that affect economic growth is called as collateral. So I am using the collateral benefits terms in my paper. Secondly, I would like to think that I will explain, actually I will revise my paper by using the bilateral capital flows, not unidirectional. I will explain the explanatory variables better. I will use average apply tariff data to capture the effect of trade openness. I strictly assume that VIX is strictly exogenous variable because it is determined also outside of the many economies. Then the existence of sovereign wealth funds are actually represented with the international financial integration as well as regional financial integration in terms of asset flows, which is one of the main components of international financial integration. So actually I captured this effect. It would be nice to divide the whole sample into all exporters and imports. I am not dealing with the political economy, so conflicts may not be matter for financial development, may be important for international financial integration and regional financial integration, but I don't think so. They might be matter for financial development and governance. I am unable to include exchange rate regime because most of the MENA economies are implementing fixed exchange rate regime. So there is not so much variation because of time data limitation. I am just focusing on 1996 to 2020 period. So the variation in the exchange rate regime data is minimal. So that would be meaningless, but if I divide the whole sample into the fixed exchange rate regime prevailing economies or managed exchange rate regime prevailing economies, then I can obtain maybe a better results, but I am so doubtful about that. As I said before, I don't think that political factors may not be matter for financial development and governance. The nonlinearity actually comes from the paper of Kowsar, which published in Journal of International Money and Finance. So in their paper, they implicitly assume that to obtain the collateral benefits, which mainly affect economic growth by indirect channels, are much more important than direct channel, and these collateral benefits are observable in economies with more financial integration. Integrated. To take into account this important issue,
one final point.
I consider the international financial integration and regional financial integration square. Lastly, I would like to say that GMM actually captures the simultaneity between the regional financial integration and institutions. I don't think there would be any problem regarding the GMM estimation method and relating to the causality effect.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So thank you all. Thank you, Bernard. And thank you, Kowsar. Hope to see you soon. And we stop here.